of Seoul Foreign Correspondents Club. It's my pleasure to meet you. The media has been referred to as a mirror and window of society. If our domestic press acts as a mirror that reflects ourselves back to us, the foreign press offers a window of communication that opens onto the world. I hope that today we further open wide that window of communication, conversing with the whole world as it becomes one through those bonds. 10 months have passed since we last met in March. I would like to thank Director Park Jung-yeol of the Korean Culture and Information Service and all those who have made possible today's valuable conversation. At the moment, the world lives in the shadow of COVID-19. As I offer consolation to many people around the world still suffering right now, allow me to also send a message of hope and camaraderie. Let us help one another and join forces to overcome this collective crisis. The world is now one. That belief will save the world. A full year and a week have passed since the first case of COVID-19 was confirmed in Korea. Over the past year, the Korean people once again bore witness to a Korea that grows stronger in crisis. Through the spirit of compromise and consideration for others, Koreans have come together as one to overcome hardship. The Korean people have acted as a trustworthy partner of the government, supplementing its shortcomings through individual sacrifice, dedication, solidarity, and cooperation. Korea's disease control and prevention efforts have come to the attention of the world only because each and every citizen served as an active participant. Such partnership between the government and its people had a positive impact on economy as well. When many countries locked up their doors, we opted for opening them wide. As a result, Korea managed to record minus 1% economic growth in 2020 amid the global economic crisis. Despite negative growth, it is expected to be hailed as the best performance among the OECD members. Such achievement was made thanks to the joint efforts of the Korean people. Upon this opportunity, allow me to express my deepest appreciation and respect to my fellow citizens. Over the past year, the foreign press have taken a keen interest in Korea's disease control and prevention measures and introduced them to the world, sometimes in praise and encouragement, sometimes in counsel and reproach. The foreign media have accompanied Korea on its journey to overcoming the COVID-19 crisis. For example, last September, the Wall Street Journal featured the success of Korea's COVID-19 countermeasures, introducing them to the countries all over the world. In particular, the large-scale general election in April and the CSAT college entrance exams in November of last year received special interest and positive coverage in the foreign media. At the same time, BBC's correspondent Laura Beaker, who is here with us today, wrote, and here I quote, "There are fears that holding an election could trigger a second wave of infections across the country, but for now, South Korea is once again determined to prove what is possible during this pandemic. Thank you, Ms. Speaker. K-quarantine, a term coined by the foreign press, highlights the achievements of the Korean people, but it is thanks to all of you here that it has become widely known to the world. As such, you too have taken part in K-quarantine. As Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea, I'm deeply grateful for your contributions. How about giving a big round of applause to one another in appreciation and encouragement? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Korea is doing its utmost in hopes of bringing the COVID-19 situation to a close within the year. Starting next month, both vaccines and treatments will be available. The government aims to complete vaccination by November and develop herd immunity. Director General Jerome Kim of the International Vaccine Institute has projected that Korea's vaccination rate will be faster than other countries despite its relatively late start. In order to make this encouraging prediction a reality, our government will strive to distribute vaccines and treatments as quickly as possible, even as we scrutinize their safety and efficacy with the greatest care. At the same time, Korea will strengthen its cooperation with the international community. In doing so, we will transparently share with the world our process of defeating the virus. Just as Korea's COVID-19 screening technology and experiences contributed to the global endeavor against the pandemic, I hope its treatment and vaccination program will do the same. While our time together today is short, I would like to take this opportunity to converse candidly with you about Korea's disease control and prevention measures, economy, peace on the Korean peninsula, and how Korea will handle the challenges that lie ahead. This year, the Korean government will do its best to overcome the pandemic, restore normalcy to people's daily lives, promote economic recovery, reduce inequality, and create a better nation where everyone prospers together. I would like to ask that you continue to support us on our shared journey as you have done so far. The Korean government will never forget the warm friendship that you, the foreign correspondents, have offered us, and we in turn aspire to return that friendship as a helping hand outstretched to the world. Knock, knock. I'm here knocking at your windows. Please do open them. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. We'll now begin the discussion. Questions will be taken from the correspondents on site and online. If you have any question, please raise your hands. When selected, please reveal your name and press name. First, we'll take questions on COVID-19 prevention measures, then move on to the questions on economy, society, politics, and diplomacy and security. You may now raise your hands to ask questions. Paula Hancock.
Hello, Prime Minister. Paula Hancock from CNN. First of all, I'd like to ask about the recent outbreaks in the missionary schools, also looking at what's happened with different religious groups. You yourself have said that you're worried this could become a second Shincheonji, a second BTJ. We're almost a year until it's the anniversary of Shincheonji. Why are these outbreaks at religious facilities still taking the government by surprise?
이제 종교가 그 일반적으로 국민들께서 잘 알려지고 또 확인된
Actually, those religious facilities
경우에 따라서는
are not
비밀스럽게,
well known
또
and being operated in a secret way, unlike the mainstream religious facilities that are well known to the general public. And those religious facilities you've mentioned,
교육부나
which was the center of the massive outbreak, are
되어 있지 않기 때문에
not registered institutions.
때문에
So they are not on the list of registered institutions in the Ministry of Education or the relevant authorities. The Shincheonji case or BTJ, the missionary organization cases,
치료한 경험이 있습니다.
were the cases that the quarantine authorities successfully identified relevant and infectious cases and tackled them.
찾아내는 노력을 하고 있어서
And
아마도 과거의 두
for the recent outbreaks in another missionary organization happened recently or a few days ago, I believe that the Korean quarantine authorities will tackle the situation successfully yet again. Thank you very much.
로라비커 특파원.
Second question on COVID-19, Laura Vicker, please.
Hello, Prime Minister. Nice to meet you. If I can ask, it was suggested that the third wave of COVID-19 was caused by overconfidence and complacency in Korea. Do you think you can avoid those mistakes this year and avoid another wave of COVID-19? Thank you very much.
사실 우리 정부가 그렇게 그 자만했던
The
적은
government was never really overconfident,
우리는 그것을 압니다.
but
경제를
we
중시하면
know that if we focus on the economy, the quarantine side may suffer. But if we prioritize the quarantine or epidemic prevention, the economy may suffer. So last year,
사태 이후에
after the Shincheonji case in Daegu, we
활성화를
tried to focus more on the revitalizing economy. That's why we had another outbreak in August. After that, we made another efforts
사회적 거리두기
with social distancing, but we had to ease the social distancing for the economy, and that triggered a third wave.
과정을 통해서
Through this process,
방역과 경제는 트레이드오프 관계에 있다.
we have realized that the quarantine and economy are in a trade-off relationship. So for now, we
방점을 두고
are focusing more on the quarantine than the economy.
우리가 이 3차 유행을 잘 막아낼 수 있기를
We hope that we can prevent the third wave in a successful manner. I still believe the quarantine is the economy, so we are focusing on the quarantine more now. Thank you very much. AFP, Kang Jin-gyu. I am Kang Jin-gyu from AFP.
For the past year, Prime Minister, you actually read the quarantine measures and activities of the government at the forefront. Are there any improvement points that you can think of, and or the mistakes that the government has made if you look back on the past year? And the second part of my question is not related to the quarantine measures taken by the Korean government. Next year, there will be the presidential elections. So I'm just wondering whether you will join the presidential race.
작년 1년 동안
If I look back on the past year, the theme of the quarantine measures taken by the government was that the quarantine measures are directly related to the national economy. Even though the government put top priority on quarantine measures
않는가 하는 우려를 가지고
to the economic activities, and some Koreans have concerns over the lack of care of the government in the area of the economic activities. There could be some improvement points that we can find out in terms of providing relevant support to the general public in terms of their economic activities. And after the massive outbreak of the COVID-19 in Daegu, we've experienced a few rounds of massive outbreak.
토끼를 쫓다 보니까
And the Korean government has pursued two goals of quarantine measures and economic recovery at the same time. And thanks to active participation of the Korean people, we've contained the pandemic in a successful way up until now. However, the pandemic took a big toll on the self-employed people and the micro business owners. And I feel grateful for the participation of the general public of Korea, and I feel sorry for the economic damages that they suffered from. And also there was a active the participation of volunteers and the healthcare workers. So I'd like to take this opportunity to extend my appreciation to them. I was often asked about whether I will join the presidential race next year. I once joined the presidential race in the past, but now the top priority that I have to pursue as of now is the quarantine measures. So without fulfilling this mission ahead of me, which are the quarantine measures to be taken by the government, I cannot think of any other things. So we need to continue to achieve economic growth, and also we need to make a V-shape rebound to recover the national economies. It seems that there is heavy burden on my shoulder, which is quarantine measures and economic recovery. I cannot think of anything else. Thank you. Next question.
Stanislav Varivoda, TASS News Agency, Russia. Mr. Prime Minister, you have mentioned the vaccination process. And apparently the government of Republic of Korea have already secured enough doses to give it the shots to every citizen. But will the vaccination be voluntarily? And what happens to the people who, let's say, refuse to take the vaccination? And the second question is the South Korean government maybe planning to buy the Russian vaccine that is already being produced actually in South Korea by a company, GL Rafa? Thank you.
예, 아무래도 백신은
When it comes to the vaccine, the government will provide it free of charge, but we cannot force people to get vaccine. The social system in our country will encourage people to get vaccinated on a voluntary basis. That's our society, so that's a way to go for us. We have signed a contract with the drug companies for the vaccines for 56 million people, and additional vaccines for 20 million people are currently being negotiated. So as of now, we do not need additional vaccines. So we are not really considering other possibilities, or we don't have any plan, although we are open to that idea.
다음 질문.
Any other questions?
다음 질문 없으시면 관련해서 러시아 세고드냐
And I'd like to give a chance to ask a question to a Russian reporter, Andrea Opert. Actually, he submitted his question online, and I'll read it for him. So the vaccination plan of the Korean government will be released on Thursday, January 28th. And I'm just wondering whether the plan includes the vaccination plan for the foreigners who are residing here in Korea for a long time. And also, President Moon Jae-in mentioned that the herd immunity will be achieved by November. So I'm just wondering whether there is any plan for the Korean government to lift the self-isolation guidelines or the suspension of no visa, the system for those who enter into the nation newly. I actually have a weekly meeting with the quarantine authorities to discuss the plan for the national vaccination project. And also during the discussion, there was a comment made with regard to the vaccination of the foreigners residing here in Korea. I'm sure that those foreigners will be included as a part of the national vaccination plan. And also, the second part of the question is related to the lifting of a self-isolation system or suspension of no visa system for those who enter into the Korea. We do not have a specific plan for that. We have a target of herd immunity creation by November. But that's a projection, and we do not have a luxury of thinking about the suspension or the cancellation of such a system as of now.
Do you have any correspondents who will ask questions, not just on COVID-19? It can be questions on international relations, security, economy, politics, or whatever. You can make questions freely.
경시평 직전이
Okay, the Chung Sye-kyun from Shinha News.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, and Happy New Year. Because I'm Chung Sye-kyun from Xinhua News Agency of China. According to the phone conversation between Chinese President Xi and South Korean President Moon yesterday, the two countries are going to launch the Year of Cultural Exchanges this year. So, Mr. Premier, how do you evaluate the cultural exchanges between South Korea and two countries in recent years? And in your opinion, how should the two countries enhance their exchanges and cooperation in this field? And do you and your government have some specific plans this year about that? Thank you very much.
예, 제가 기억하기로는 내년이 한중수교
I believe that next year marks the 30th anniversary since the establishment of the diplomatic relations between two countries. In the past 30 years, economy exchange has been the most active one, but I believe the cultural exchange has also been active. Before that, Korea and country were adjacent with each other, and there was active exchange as well. So in addition to economic cooperation, a cultural exchange can bring the two countries together, and it can also narrow the gap between the people of the two countries. It will be such an important field. So although the cultural exchange has been active so far between the two countries, sometimes the politics would have influence over the cultural exchange so far, but that is not really desirable in my point of view. Between the two countries, there should be always exchange when it comes to culture or sport and economic cooperation as well. So next year, as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the diplomatic relations, I believe we need some culture exchange event. And starting from that, I believe the more active exchange and cooperation between two countries can happen, which can strengthen the friendship between Korean and Chinese people. That's my hope.
Mr. Okasaka, I'm Okasaka from Kyodo News. I'd like to ask a question about the relationship between Korea and Japan. For the future-oriented improvement of the relations between the two countries need to solve a few issues, such as the Korean Supreme Court's ruling of the compensation of the Japanese government for the forced labor victims during the wartime. And also, as for the comfort women, you just mentioned that there should be a discussion and negotiations made between the two countries to find a compromise measure. As the Prime Minister of Korea and also as a potential presidential candidate, what kind of big picture do you have in your mind, particularly regarding the roadmap for the improvement of the relations between Korea and Japan? Korea and Japan have been the closest neighbors. However, the two countries share some pains caused by their histories. However, I believe that the past should not impede into the future relationship of the two countries. So we need to be future-oriented and forward-looking when we deal with each other. However, that's not an easy job. There are some grudges and bad feelings about each other based on the past history of the two countries. I believe that the leaders of the two countries as well as the people of the two countries should do their best to resolve the history-related issues. But as you know, Korea sticks to the principle of separation of three powers: legislative, administrative, and judicial powers. And judicial systems, ruling or judgments can be sometimes burdensome to the administration, but that's a democratic system that Korea sticks to and comply with. And I believe that we should respect the rulings made by the judicial system of the nation. And also there have been many efforts made to resolve the past history issue between the two countries in previous administrations, and there were times when there was a significant progress made in that area. And I believe that we need to make efforts to nurture mutually respecting culture between the two countries. And also, in the past, there were times that we had a successful cooperational relations between the two countries, not only in the economic area, but also in other areas. But recently, we have experienced a few hiccups or difficulties. So we need to resolve those imminent issues, and we need to move forward to the mutually benefiting relations and directions. And as the Prime Minister of Korea, I'll do my utmost to achieve such goal. In the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, the personal exchanges or the face-to-face meetings become extremely difficult. It would have been much better if we had a chance to have a face-to-face meeting to resolve past history issues. And as we all know, the Asian countries, particularly Korea, Japan, and China, have a meeting to cherish face-to-face meetings and have active exchanges through those face-to-face meetings. And as we all know, the tourism has been very active among the three neighboring countries, Korea, Japan, and China. And I hope that we will go back to the normal way of life. That's my hope. Thank you.
Next, Thomas Maerska from UPI.
Hello, I'm Thomas Maerska with UPI. I just wanted to ask a question about the new administration of President Biden in the U.S. In recent days, some members of the administration have been sending signals that they are treating the North Korea issue seriously, the nuclear proliferation issue, and and also have signaled that they seem open to some new approaches to dealing with it. That's what the Secretary of State said. And I'm just wondering what kind of impression you're getting so far from the Biden administration as far as their approach to the Korean Peninsula, and what sort of approach would you hope to see them take in order to get the peace process moving again on the Korean Peninsula? Thank you.
Korea and the U.S. are in a special alliance relations For important issues such as North Korea's nuclear issues, we have closely communicated and discussed with each other to resolve the issues. Some have been resolved, others are not. The North Korean nuclear issue, it still remains unresolved, which is regrettable. The new administration has been launched, and compared to the previous administration, I believe the new administration may have different policies regarding the North Korean issues. So I believe that sufficient discussion is necessary between the two countries. As you mentioned, some officials from the new administration have shown interest in North Korea, and I believe that's fortunate because indifference is the biggest issue. So because they showed interest, it says fortunate, but we have to find solutions on this issue based on the alliance between the two countries. So we have to come up with desirable solutions and measures. And the Republic of Korea and the U.S. should communicate with each other and cooperate with each other to resolve this issue. The current stance of the Korean government is that we want to have a dialogue and communication between two Koreas and come up with cooperations to develop more future-oriented relations and achieve the denuclearization. That is our principles. And based on these principles, we will want to discuss with the U.S. and find a way to resolve the issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. The President Moon Jae-in at the end of last year announced a new Southern Policy Plus. So can you say more about this new policy? What is the difference between the new Southern policy and when does Korea start implementing this policy? The new Southern Policy Plus. Yeah.
예, 뭐 그
In fact, the current administration has come up with new southern policy as well as new northern policy. The key of the new southern policy is putting as diplomatic efforts focus on the Asian region. And in the Asian region, Vietnam has a big significance because more and more Korean companies make investment in Vietnam. And also, increasing number of Vietnamese workers come into Korea and work here. In addition to that, there are increasing number of exchanges in terms of students and the tourists. So it seems that there is a growing cooperation relations between Korea and Vietnam. And I believe that in alignment with the new southern policy of Moon Jae-in government, the Korean relations with Vietnam will grow further. And the key of the relations between the two countries is the mutual benefit. And also, the Korean companies will boost their investment in Vietnam while increasing the trade in terms of goods and services. It's been 3 to 4 years since the implementation of the new southern policy by the Moon Jae-in government. And also, there has been positive evaluations made with regard to the result of the new southern policy. I believe that the new Southern policy will make a further contribution to the cooperation between the two countries in many ways. Thank you.
Next question, Robert McBride.
Rob McBride from Al Jazeera Network. I wanted to ask about the continued detention of the South Korean tanker, the Hanguk Chemi, by the Iranian government, and whether he believes that the change in U.S. administration might have a positive impact on the situation with regard to U.S.-Iranian relations, and also possibly allow South Korea to have more independence or more freedom in dealing directly with the Iranian authorities.
예, 우리 선박이
So the Korean vessel has been detained for almost 3 weeks as of now, which is regrettable and unfortunate. It's, I believe it's a technical issue, as some say, but there is no clear evidence
상당히 답답한
for that.
입장입니다만
So it's frustrating for us. But the government
풀려날 수 있도록 최선의 노력을
is making its utmost efforts to allow the vessels to be released as soon as possible. As you mentioned, the U.S.-Iran relations may have influence on this issue. I really hope that it can have a positive influence and positive impact. I hope this issue can be resolved as soon as possible so that the public and the Korean people would not be concerned about it, and the government is doing its best to make that happen. Thank you.
특파원님들 질문은 다 썼습니다. 나중에 온라인 질문은
We would like to take questions from online, and if we have some time left, then we'll take questions from the reporters who are on the site. We have 300 foreign correspondents invited to the press conference. The foreign correspondents from 8 countries are participating in today's forum on the site. And also we have many foreign correspondents who are joining virtually. We have 110 foreign ambassadors who are actually watching the live streaming of today's policy forum. The Honorable Ambassador from Oman and other countries are also watching today's policy forum. I'd like to take this opportunity to extend my appreciation to all the viewers.
We'll now move on to the online questions. Those of you who have not have joined us on site are now asking us questions on online messengers. So we'll receive online questions that are not really overlapping with the questions that we have received. First, MBC Kim Sung-hee reporter asked us 2 questions. COVAX facility is experiencing some shortage of resources, so the supply of vaccine may not be possible in time. Do you still believe that there is no problem with the current scheduling with the vaccination? Also, if other drug companies cannot provide the vaccines in time, can the Korean government provide the vaccination within this year? The second question is, the public vaccination can lead to herd immunity according to government, and if there is any remaining vaccine after the vaccination for all public, can you provide the vaccines to North Korea? The COVAX facility is a program that can be joined by countries with insufficient financial resources, so it's an important platform. So I think that I really hope that COVAX facility can work without any problems. Not just Korea, but there are many other countries who are experiencing difficulties, and if the vaccines cannot be provided to those countries, it could lead to a big problem. Out of vaccines for 56 million people, vaccines for 10 million people will be provided through COVAX facilities, so it's about 17%. Even if we have a problem with the supply, to some extent, 70% is not a huge deal, because in addition to the vaccines for 56 million people, we have additional vaccines for 20 million people that are currently under discussion, so it's not going to be a huge issue. A few domestic drug companies are currently developing vaccines. The clinical trial is currently underway. Our initial wish was to see the domestic companies developing vaccines within this year, but it's not something that we can guarantee because we'll have to see what happens. So the Korean government hope that the development of the vaccines by domestic companies can be completed by end of this year, and the third trial, a clinical trial, will be completed. And as you mentioned, if we signed a contract for additional 20 million vaccines, and all of these vaccines can be utilized without any problems, then we may have some vaccines that we are not going to use. It could be a good thing. If that happens, we can share it with a third country experiencing difficulties, or even North Korea. I don't think we need to close that opportunity. We are open to that option. But when it comes to the creation of a herd immunity, our projection is around September. So our aim is to for the vaccination is completed 70% for the public by end of September. And it's not easy to predict exactly what happens, but we will consider that possibility as an open option.
We have taken a few questions from online, and there is one common question. And a reporter from U.S. and from China asked the same question, which is about the compensation for the business loss of self-employed people here in Korea. There is a concern over the insufficient the financial support for the self-employed people here in Korea. So do you consider any legislation with regard to the support for the self-employed people or micro business owners to compensate their business losses in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic? And if such compensation is made, what percentage of the loss should be covered? And also for the last year's business loss, is there any additional plan for the government to compensate such loss? First of all, I'd like to thank you for taking interest in this issue. According to the Korean Constitution, the government should make relevant compensation for the people when it imposes certain restrictions to the livelihoods of the people or the businesses of its people. But up until now, there has been no relevant bill or legislation made, and instead of such bill, the government has made emergency relief payment in coordination with the National Assembly. But currently, the provision of the National Constitution that I mentioned earlier has been highlighted, and some people insist that the government should make relevant compensation for the business loss of the self-employed people in accordance with the spirit of the National Constitution. I agree to that opinion. The Korean government and the National Assembly should respect the spirit of that provision of the national institution and should come up with a relevant legal framework or legislation to provide such kind of compensation in case of prohibition or the limitation of businesses of the Korean people. The certain compensation should be made, and actually the Korean government has come up with the regulations that bans or the limit the businesses of some people to fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. And relevant compensation should be made, that's for sure. But when it comes to how we can make relevant compensation, we need to think about further. Based on the basic spirit of the national constitution, we need to compensate the sales profit loss suffered by the self-employed people. So we are talking about the compensation for the sales profit, not the sales revenue itself. For example, certain micro business owners suffer from large sales profit loss, even though there is very little loss made to the sales revenue. So I believe that the compensation should be made exactly for the profit loss, not the sales loss itself. So we can actually make use of Korean the tax revenue data or record to identify the exact losses suffered by self-employed people or micro business owners. Currently, discussion is being made with regard to the detailed government plan for compensation of business loss of self-employed people or small business owners. And I cannot share the details right now because they are not fixed yet. But it is required for the Korean government to come up with a consensus with the National Assembly. The basic direction is the one that I mentioned in my remark. I hope that I answered your question properly.
Also, the support for small business owners so far may not have been enough. That was one of the questions as well. The government did its best, but small business owners have probably suffered more than what we have provided, and I agree with that. That is why, through legislation, we have to make more efforts to compensate the amount that's close to the loss incurred. The government did its best and has done its best so far, but I do agree that it was not sufficient. So we'd like to improve that in the future. Thank you very much. Regarding COVID-19, we have online question, and we can also take additional questions from the correspondents on site. Jennifer Zhang from Iran Prestige. In November, the government plans the herd immunity by in November. I am international mission school. Did they have any influence on the vaccination? And considering many other religious groups similar to that across the country, how much of the country's herd immunity plan will be effective? We are considering and planning the herd immunity by November because about 60–70% of the general public can get vaccinated by September. So that is our target. And once that is done, the herd immunity can be created. So whether it's faculty members or the students of these IM international mission schools, I believe even the international schools were to be the target of the vaccination in the third and the fourth quarter. The original plan for the vaccination by the government will be proceeded without any problems according to the plan.
We would like to take additional questions from the correspondents who are on the site. So you can ask questions about the foreign affairs or some other topics as well.
To Rob Al Jazeera's question on the South Korean tanker being held in Iran. Now, I understand that you did have a delegation that went to Tehran. The Vice Foreign Minister went for negotiations as well. Are there any plans at this point on the South Korean side to try and release the funds that Iran is talking about, this estimated $7 billion that's stuck in South Korean banks? Do you have plans to try and release those funds?
예, 한국은 당연히 이제 그 돈은
Actually, the money which is deposited in the Korean bank is not owned by the Korean government. So the money belongs to the owner of that finance or money. But we all know that Iran is subject to the international sanctions, and we cannot actually return that money to Iran. So once the issue related to the international sanction is resolved, then we are more than willing to return that finance or that money to Iran.
Thank you very much. Laura Vicker, our reporter, if you have any additional questions.
Thank you for taking an additional question. Just in kind of reference to the mention of North Korea and COVID-19 and the idea that South Korea may help with the vaccination program, has there been any communication with North Korea with regards to COVID-19? And what is your understanding of the situation in North Korea presently with regards to the pandemic?
예, 우선
First off,
북한의 코로나 상황을
the COVID-19 situation in North Korea has not been known exactly, but according to a report made by North Korea to WHO, they are saying that there's no confirmed cases in North Korea. I'm not expert in North Korea issues, but during the entire 2020 year, the North Korea went into complete lockdown to prevent any spread of the virus. So the report by North Korea can be true. There is no clear evidence to suspect their argument.
사실은 그 백신이 상당히 비싼
Vaccine is an expensive drug. So if North Korea needs vaccine but cannot afford it, and the Republic of Korea wished to cooperate with North Korea in many ways, including the health field, and in also our efforts for humanitarian help. I believe that's our basic stance, to help North Korea if necessary. But the talk with North Korea is not really normalized as of now. So when it comes to this issue, there has not been a proper talk or discussion with North Korea. That's the current status.
Thank you. We also had a similar question asked through online. Shin Sing-hyuk from the U.S. Diplomatic and also another reporter from China asked the same question. There was an agreement made between the two Koreas with regard to the visit of Chairman Kim Jong-un to South Korea. And also, the nuclear issue of South Korea is an imminent issue to be tackled by Korea and the U.S. So I'm just wondering, what is the plan of the Moon Jae-in government to tackle the inter-Korean relations or talks that are in stalemate right now? Chairman Kim Jong-un promised to pay a visit to South Korea, and I believe that the promise is still valid. So from the perspective of the Korean government, we expect Chairman Kim to visit Korea so we can further promote the peace on the Korean peninsula as well as mutual prosperity of the two Koreas. That's our expectation. And I believe that the day will come when the Chairman Kim Jong-un can visit South Korea. But I'm not sure whether that will be within the term of President Moon Jae-in. And it will be great if Chairman Kim Jong-un can visit South Korea within the term of President Moon Jae-in. And I believe that the peace on the Korean peninsula can be achieved only when the denuclearization process is implemented properly. And in order to achieve that goal, we need to normalize the inter-Korean talks, and such kind of talks can be done in close cooperation and consultation between South Korea and the U.S. In addition to that, the South Korean government will do its utmost to normalize its relations with North Korea in order to resume its talk with North Korea. So South Korea will do its utmost in cooperation with the neighboring countries, but also it will do its utmost to actually resume its talk with North Korea on its own as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I understand there are many interests in the inter-Korean relations. So, yes, Prime Minister, Tokyo Olympics is scheduled for this year. Because of the COVID-19, we have to wait and see what will happen. Following the Pyeongchang Olympics, Pyeongchang Winter Olympics was as successful as the peaceful Olympics, and maybe there could be some cooperation regarding the Olympics as well between the two countries. What's your opinion on that? I really hope that Tokyo Olympics can be successfully held. Every 4 years, so the young people around the world wait for the Olympics, and they train really hard and prepare really hard for the Olympics. Also, Olympics is an event for the peace. In Japan, I understand that the people have made great efforts to organize the Olympics, so I really hope to see the Olympics to be held in July this year. As you have mentioned, we in Korea have had a Pyeongchang Olympics, which opened a way to talk between the two countries. So through the Tokyo Olympics, there could be a new opportunity to talk between the two countries. And if we can have that opportunity, the significance of the Olympics could increase. And this is something that the Republic of Korea would definitely want. So we really hope that we can use this as a good opportunity.
Are there any questions? You can ask questions about the inter-Korean relations, the foreign affairs, or the economic affairs. Today's policy forum is being broadcasted live through KTV, Arirang TV, and the YouTube channel of the Office of the Prime Minister. We have 10 foreign correspondents who are participating on site, and actually those the foreign correspondents who are joining today's policy forum virtually can also raise their questions through chat box. We have another question from a Russian report, Andrei Opet. Prime Minister mentioned that there is no additional plan for the procuring of additional vaccines, and the AstraZeneca is working on the combination of its vaccines with a Russian vaccine. So if the combined the vaccines are found to be efficacious enough, I'm just wondering whether the Korean government has planned to use such combined vaccine as well. Currently, Korean pharmaceutical companies are working on the development of vaccines on their own. So we have a plan to use the imported vaccines, and once the domestic pharmaceutical companies succeed in developing the domestic vaccines, that we are willing to use them as well. And also some other forms of vaccines can be introduced to Korea if needed as a bridge. So if the domestic pharmaceutical companies succeed in developing their vaccines, then the Korean government will not need to import additional foreign vaccines. However, if the domestic pharmaceutical companies suffer from delay in their development cycle, then Korea may need to procure more vaccines from the overseas pharmaceutical companies, and as time goes by, we will see which vaccine works better than others. And based on the proven efficacy of vaccines, the Korean government will consider purchasing the better vaccines. Thank you.
Is there any other questions that we can take from the on-site correspondents? It could be on COVID-19. Yes.
Thank you for another question. I can keep going all day. Prime Minister, I wanted to follow up on my original question, talking about the religious groups, the religious facilities, where many of these outbreaks of COVID are happening at the moment. Considering these outbreaks do continue to keep blindsiding the government and quarantine efforts, what's the solution? I mean, what can you do to try and prevent certain groups or institutions that don't feel they have to follow the rules? How can you bring them in line with the rest of the country?
예, 대한민국은 그 종교의 자유가
The Republic of Korea guarantees the freedom of religion under our constitution. But if the freedom of religion harms the public, then it is not really included in the constitutional right. It means that religious people have to abide by our regulations for quarantine and our efforts to fight against the virus. So BTJ or Shincheonji were required to follow the rules in the past, and IM international mission schools will be forced to follow the rules as well. And when it comes to additional risk factors similar to this, we will have to observe well. Even this morning, I made an order at the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters to make a thorough monitoring. If we could have confirmed these issues without any blind spot, they would have been much better. So it is regrettable and unfortunate that this had happened again. In the future, we'll try our best to monitor thoroughly and promptly, although these are risk factors, to resolve the issues as soon as possible. But K-quarantine, I believe, is currently facing season 2, because so far we focused on test, trace, and treatment, which are 3 T strategies to implement K-quarantine. But once we have the vaccines and treatment rolled out, then we will have to transit from K-quarantine to K-vaccination. So once the herd immunity is created, then the potential risk factors as religious groups can be resolved through herd immunity. Starting from the end of February, the vaccination will begin. After that, I believe that the overall landscape of K quarantine will be changed towards K vaccination. Still, up until we have a complete creation of the herd immunity, we will have to make efforts for epidemic prevention, but I believe the risk factor will decrease.
Thank you. Is there any other question?
Question on freedom of speech. We all know that South Korea, obviously, from the protests we see constantly in Gwangwon here, even during the pandemic, South Korea is committed to freedom of speech. When it comes to the issue elsewhere in Asia, sometimes South Korea gets criticized for not being vocal enough. I'm thinking in particular about the situation in Hong Kong and the restriction of freedoms there by Beijing, while other vibrant democracies such as Japan and Taiwan have been very critical of Beijing. South Korea does not seem to have been as vocal. Why not?
예, 아시는 것처럼 한국의
As you all know, the level of freedom of press here in Korea is quite high and outstanding. And also, I believe that the level of freedom of press here in Korea gets improved even in this administration. I believe that the members of the press can exercise their freedom of press, and also the general public can exercise its right to freedom of press. In the midst of COVID-19 pandemic situation, a large-scale demonstration is not allowed. However, one-man demonstration or small-scale demonstration are still allowed despite the current pandemic situation. That's the basic stance of the Korean government, and I believe that is aligned with the Constitution of Korea. And the civic society of South Korea takes keen interest in what's happening in foreign countries. And to the best of my knowledge, the Korean civic groups also are very vocal about what's happening in other Asian countries. There could be some criticism that the Korean civic groups are not vocal enough or do not raise a strong voice against what's happening in other parts of the Asian region. But actually, the Korean government hasn't not imposed any restrictions on the freedom of speech of the Korean civic groups. And also the Korean government as well as the civic groups in the nation engage themselves in various activities to exercise freedom of speech. And the government has no intention to restrict the freedom of speech.
Thank you very much. We have 2 questions from online, but do we have any more questions from the correspondent on site? If then we'll take questions from you. If not, we will take final 2 online questions. Do we have any questions from the correspondent here? Then we'll move on to the online question. First, from Kim Moo-sung from Al Jazeera. The government is now moving its policy and currently reviewing the amendment of the law to focus less on the marriage when it comes to family relations. There can be some resistance among the public. Do you have any plan or measure to convince the public when it comes to this change of the policy? I'm currently doing a conversation and communication on this. And we have a Thursday talk within the Prime Minister's office. And I believe that we had a discussion on this issue. There is a new culture being created and the conception of the family is changing in our society. Republic of Korea respects the freedom of individuals. The world changes in various ways, and sometimes it changes in a way that we did not really want or anticipate. And as long as the change does not harm the country or the mankind, we have to respect that change, and we have to guarantee the rights of the freedom of the people for those changes. So when it comes to new types of family and new systems for new types of family, we want to be more open. And the National Assembly should discuss this issue with the civic society. And some would resist or oppose to that change, and we have to discuss with them as well. We will not rush towards this change, but we believe that we will continue our efforts to embrace more diversity when it comes to the family system and the types of family. The conventional concept, or traditional concept for the family or ethics may change as the world changes and people's attitudes or mindset changes. And I believe that the law and the system should follow that change. But if we rush too much, there could be some unnecessary conflicts. So we have to focus on easing the conflict through communication, to make the changes more beautiful. I believe that it is a wise way to go for us. Thank you.
The last question is a simple question asked by a reporter from New China News Agency. Could you please explain your stance on retrospective application of profit loss compensation for self-employed people here in Korea? There are a few members of the National Assembly who are for the retrospective application of business loss compensation. As I mentioned before, the Article 23 of the National Constitution specifies that the government needs to compensate for the loss of the business or profits suffered by the general public. That Constitution provision is a starting point, and we haven't decided or confirmed the details with regard to the measures to compensate the self-employed people. I can actually express my personal opinion. However, the relevant discussions are being made within the government and will be made in the National Assembly, and my personal opinion can cause some confusion. So what I can tell you right now is that the relevant legislation will be made in accordance with the very spirit of the National Constitution, and the National Assembly will work on that. And please wait for the details. And the discussion needs to be made within the government, and also the consultation needs to be made between the government and the National Assembly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The Prime Minister has a next schedule, so we have to wrap up here. Thanks to all of you who have raised so many different questions. We had a really good forum. We had to have limit the number of correspondents attending the forum, but we could take questions from online as well, so it was very meaningful. I told you in the beginning that we have to open the window of communication for talk, so I believe that you have opened up the window so widely, so thank you very much. I'd like to re-emphasize that the foreign correspondents have connected Korea with the world, and I'm truly grateful for your efforts. So I hope that the window that we have opened today for communication can remain open in the future so that we can continue our discussion and communication together. And with your efforts, people can understand what is happening in Korea, and also Korean people can understand what's going on in the world as well. The Republic of Korea is overcoming COVID-19 pandemic relatively well. Of course, some would say we still have some way to go, and we have to make more efforts. I believe some of the shortcomings of the governments are being compensated by the efforts by the citizens. That's why I express my gratitude for the people in the beginning. We have open democracy and a mature citizenship and the freedom of speech in Korea. And these three create a harmonious balance together, and they're working well together. That is why the Republic of Korea is overcoming the COVID-19 relatively well, and all of you are at the center of that. So I'd like to say again that I'm grateful for your cooperation. I hope that our efforts can be of help for the efforts by the world. The experiences we've had in Korea and various tools that we've developed in Korea can be shared with the global citizens so that it can contribute to the healthcare efforts in the world. That's my hope. Crisis is another opportunity, as many say. I believe that we can overcome the pandemic together, and we can be united as one, as the global citizens. And I really want to see the world, and we could see that and confirm that today, and we could build our trust together. So it was a meaningful time. I hope that you have not closed the window just yet. So, of course, you have to make sure that you open the window for ventilation purposes, but I hope that you can have the window open for communication with me as well. Through the open window of yours, we will feel soon the breeze of spring coming in after difficult and cold winter. The Republic of Korea hopes to contribute to creating that breeze of spring, and it will do its best. I really hope to create the world into one, and with that, we can create advancement of mankind with that one world. And I will also contribute and make more efforts towards that end. Thank you very much again for joining me today, and thanks for your valuable questions as well. I also wish all of your health and happiness during your stay in Korea. Thank you very much. This concludes 2021 first FPC Korea Police Forum with the Prime Minister Chung Sye-kyun. Thank you very much.